I'll never forget the moment she whispered those two words. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a shout or a scream, just a soft whisper that made the air feel thick with tension. At first, I thought I had imagined it. But the look on her face, it stayed with me. I own a small diner in a quiet neighborhood. It's not the kind of place where big things happen, just regulars, the occasional new face and the hum of coffee machines and sizzling grills. But that day, everything changed. The day a 9-year-old girl, dressed in ragged clothes and with wide, scared eyes, walked into my restaurant. I had just finished taking a break, stretching my legs, when I saw her standing by the door. She was tiny, her face framed by a tangle of hair, dirt smudged across her cheeks. She looked lost, like she had nowhere to go. It wasn't unusual to see kids come in for a meal, but this little girl felt different. There was something about her eyes, like she had seen too much, and at the same time, nothing at all. She hesitated before walking in, her eyes scanning the room. The place was mostly empty, save for a couple in the corner booth. She didn't sit at one of the tables. Instead, she walked up to the counter where I was standing, wiping down a glass. She was quiet at first, just staring at the menu board above the counter, her little fingers nervously twirling a strand of hair. "Can I help you, sweetie?" I asked, trying to soften my voice. I wasn't sure what had brought her in. Maybe she was hungry, or maybe she was just looking for a safe place. She looked at me, her eyes deep and sad, and then whispered, "They're coming." I frowned. "Who?" Her eyes flickered toward the window, then back to me. "The men, they're coming." Before I could respond, the door swung open, and two men walked in. They were both big, tough-looking guys, wearing leather jackets. They didn't look like they were here for a meal. Their eyes scanned the room, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Without missing a beat, the girl spoke again, her voice even quieter than before, but her words hit me like a slap. "Lock the door." I stared at her, confused. "What?" "Lock the door," she repeated, this time with more urgency. Her hands clenched into fists, and I could see the fear in her eyes. It was like something inside her had snapped, and she was desperate for me to understand. I don't know why I listened. Maybe it was the way she looked at me, like she was begging for help. I don't know, but I reached for the door lock. The moment I turned it, the two men at the counter noticed. One of them stepped forward. "What the hell's the matter with you?" he barked at me. "You locking us in? We're just here for lunch." I didn't say anything. The girl's eyes were still fixed on me, watching me with a look that seemed to say, "Do it, or it's too late." I glanced at the men again, and something about them made me uneasy. Their attitude didn't fit the place. They didn't belong here. I kept my hands steady as I finished locking the door, but when I turned around, the girl was already sitting at a booth in the back, staring down at the table with her hands folded. She hadn't said another word since the lock. The two men didn't seem to notice the tension in the air. They walked to the counter like they were regular customers, talking about something I couldn't quite hear. The other patrons didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary either. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, but I couldn't. The girl stayed in the booth, her eyes now glued to the men. I saw the look she gave them, like she knew something they didn't. Something dark. Minutes passed. I tried to focus on my work, cleaning and taking orders, but I couldn't stop glancing at the girl. She didn't speak again. Her silence was more unsettling than any noise could have been. The door rattled as someone tried to turn the knob. I glanced up. The two men had noticed it was locked. One of them walked over to the door, testing it with his shoulder. It didn't budge. He slammed his fist against the glass. "Hey, unlock this damn door," he shouted. I didn't move. I couldn't. The girl was still watching him, and then, in the quietest voice, she said two words that made my stomach drop. "They'll come for you." The men froze. They turned to her, their faces suddenly pale, like they had just realized something. One of them started to say something, but the other gripped his arm and pulled him back. "You heard that?" The first one muttered, his voice shaky. The other man didn't answer, just stared at her like he had seen a ghost. I didn't know what was happening, but I could feel the tension building in the room. something was about to. The men backed away from the door, muttering to each other in low voices. It wasn't until a few moments later that I saw them leave. They didn't say anything else, didn't look at me or anyone else in the restaurant. They just walked out the door, and when the door clicked shut behind them, I unlocked it. The girl never spoke again. She just stood up from her booth, walked to the counter, and slid a crumpled bill across it. She didn't look at me as she left, but I saw her eyes, those same eyes that had said so much already. There was something in them that made me understand. Whatever she had known, whatever she had seen, it was something dark, something she had lived with for too long. I watched her disappear into the street, the shadows swallowing her up. The diner was quiet again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened, and I couldn't shake the weight of her words. They'll come for you. I never saw her again, and to this day, I don't know who the men were or what had happened, but I've learned to trust people when they say they need help, especially when they've seen things no child should ever have to see. Sometimes it's the quiet ones, the ones who don't speak much, who know exactly what's coming. And sometimes those two words are all it takes to change everything. The diner returned to its usual rhythm after she left, but something inside me was different. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about that girl. Her voice, soft and fearful, echoed in my mind. They'll come for you. The words haunted me in a way I couldn't shake off. I tried to go on with my life. The routine of serving food, refilling coffee cups, and chatting with regulars helped to keep my mind distracted, but the unease never fully left. Every time someone walked through that door, I'd look up, half expecting to see her again. But she never came back. It wasn't until a week later that the first sign came. It was a normal Wednesday afternoon when a man walked into the diner, tall and wearing a dark suit. He looked out of place in the usual crowd. His eyes were sharp, scanning the room as he approached the counter. I didn't recognize. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low but firm. "I'm looking for someone." I had learned to stay calm in situations like this, where someone might be looking for another person, but I could tell something was off. His eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made me feel like he could see straight through me. "I'm sorry, I don't know who you're talking about," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man didn't seem surprised. He just nodded, like he had expected my answer. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the diner. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was just another random visitor, I thought. But over the next few days, things started to get strange. A few more men, dressed similarly in dark suits, came into the diner. Each one asked about the same person, the little girl. Some of them were more direct than others, but all of them seemed to know exactly who I was. They asked if I had seen her, where she'd gone, and if I'd heard anything about her. I started getting nervous. I tried to dodge their questions, told them I hadn't seen her in a while, but they didn't seem convinced. One of them even slipped a business card into my hand as he left, saying, "If you see her, you contact me. It's important." I didn't know what to make of it all. It was like I had stumbled into something much bigger than myself, something that I wasn't prepared to deal with. I started locking the doors earlier in the evening, keeping the place quieter. The thought of something happening to me of being dragged into whatever this was kept me up at night. Then the phone call came. It was late, just after closing time, when my phone rang. I wasn't expecting any calls, so I answered hesitantly. "Is this the diner on Oak Street?" a voice on the other end asked, deep and cold. It was one of the men from earlier. "Yes," I replied, my voice trembling. "Who is this?" "You saw her," the voice said. "The girl. I need to know where she is." "I don't know," I said quickly. "She hasn't been back. She left that day, and I haven't seen her since." The man was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke again, slower this time, like he was weighing every word. "You need to stop lying. We know you saw her. We know she spoke to you." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I'm not lying," I whispered. She was just a little girl. She said she was in trouble. I don't know anything more." The line went silent, and for a moment, I thought they had hung up. But then I heard a low chuckle, as if they were mocking me. "We'll be watching you," the voice said before the line went down. That night, I sat in my apartment, the phone still in my hand, feeling a sense of dread fill my chest. I couldn't get the girl out of my mind. What had she known? What was she running from? And why had she come to me? The next morning, I opened the diner like usual. but I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was coming. My eyes constantly darted to the door, and my hand hovered near the lock. The men, the ones in the dark suits, kept coming in and out, asking the same questions, getting more impatient each time. Then, one afternoon, a woman came in. She was older than the girl, maybe in her mid-30s, but she had the same sharp eyes, the same air of quiet intensity. She walked straight up to me, not bothering with pleasantries, and said, "I need to speak to you about the girl, the one who came here." My heart skipped a beat. I knew exactly who she meant. "She's safe," I said quickly, even though I didn't know if that was true. "I haven't seen her in a week." The woman leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Listen to me carefully. If you want to stay out of this, you need to stop asking questions. Stop looking for her. She's not just a lost child. She's tied up in something much bigger, something dangerous. People like us, we don't survive when we get involved in that." I froze, my stomach turning. "What are you talking about?" But before she could answer, the bell above the door rang. The woman's eyes darted to the door, then back to me. She stood up abruptly, her face pale. Without a word, she turned and left. I never saw her again. Days passed, and I tried to keep a low profile, serving the regulars and ignoring the men who kept asking about the girl. But the feeling of dread never left. I knew something had happened to her, something bad, and it felt like whatever was coming was already here. And then, one afternoon, I heard a knock on the diner door. I turned slowly, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. There she was, the girl. She was standing outside, her face pressed against the glass, staring in at me. Her eyes were empty, and all she did was whisper the same two words again. "They're here." I froze. My heart slammed in my chest as I stared at her through the glass. There she was, the little girl I'd been haunted by for days, her face pressed against the window, her eyes wide and full of fear. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just stood there, motionless, her breath fogging up the glass. I felt like the world around me had gone completely still. The room, the diner, the hum of the refrigerator, everything seemed to fade away except for her. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. And then I saw a black SUV slowly pulled up across the street. The windows were tinted dark, but I could make out the shadows inside, figures, moving in sync, like they were waiting for something. My heart sank as I realized that they were watching her. They had been watching her the whole time. I turned back to the door, my hands shaking as I slowly walked toward it. My thoughts were racing. Should I let her in? Was I putting myself in danger by helping her? What would they do if they found out I had seen her again? But before I could even reach the door, the girl moved. She didn't knock or try to open it. She just turned and ran. I rushed to the window, pressing my hands against the cool glass, but by the time I looked outside, she had disappeared. I felt a strange mix of relief and fear, relief that she wasn't out there, but fear of what she was running from. I should have locked the door. I should have done something, anything to protect her. But by the time I reached for the lock, the SUV was already pulling away, and the girl was gone. I didn't know what I was supposed to do next. I couldn't stop thinking about those two words she had whispered again. "They're here." Whoever they were coming for her, and I had no idea how far it had gone, how deep the danger ran. The rest of the day passed in a blur. The customers came and went, and I did my best to keep up with the usual routine, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't focus. Every time the door opened, my heart would skip a beat. Every knock, every rustle outside, I couldn't help but look toward the window, half expecting to see her standing there again. But she didn't come back. That night, when the diner was closed and I was sitting in the back office, the phone rang again. I answered without hesitation, my throat tight. "Hello, it's me," a voice said. It was one of the men, the one who had been in and out of the diner for days, the one with the dark eyes and cold demeanor. "You saw her again?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. The words were stuck in my throat. "You need to stop asking questions," he continued. "The girl you're looking for, she's not who you think she is. If you keep getting involved, you're going to regret it." I swallowed hard. "What are you talking about? Who is she?" There was a pause, and for a moment, I thought he might hang up. But then he spoke again, his voice quieter now. "She's part of something bigger," he said, almost like he was warning me. "Something dangerous. And the people who are after her, They won't stop until they get what they want. They'll burn everything to the ground if they have to. You don't want to get in the way of that. I felt like the ground beneath me was shifting. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hang up, to tell him to leave me alone, but another part, something deeper, more gut-wrenching, told me that I couldn't just let it go. I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen the fear in her eyes, the way she looked at me like I was the last person she could trust. What happened to her? I finally asked, my voice trembling. What's going on? There was a long pause on the other end. For a moment I thought the line had gone dead. Then the man spoke again, but his tone was darker, more final. I don't have time to explain, he said. But you need to stay out of it. You need to forget her. You'll be better off if you do. I wanted to argue, wanted to demand more answers, but the words died in my throat. The line went silent, and before I could say another word, the call ended. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the phone still pressed against my ear. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just been warned that getting involved with her, with whatever this was, could cost me more than I was willing to pay. But it was too late. I couldn't forget her. I couldn't forget the way she had looked at me, the way her words had hung in the air, heavy with meaning. She wasn't just a frightened little girl. There was something more to her, something important, and I had to know what it was. The next morning, I decided I was going to find out. I wasn't going to let those men control what I did. I wasn't going to sit back and pretend that nothing was happening. I owed it to her to at least try. I didn't know where to start, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her face whatever was coming alone. The morning after the phone call, I didn't waste any time. I closed the diner early, leaving a note on the door saying I was out for a bit, not knowing when I'd be back. I didn't know what kind of danger I was stepping into, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. Not anymore. I had no clear plan. I didn't know where she'd gone, where to find her, or even who the people after her were. But I had to start somewhere, and I started by retracing her steps. The day she came into the diner, I watched the parking lot, saw the direction she ran in before disappearing. It was a small neighborhood with mostly old houses, quiet streets. If she hadn't gone far, there had to be somewhere nearby that she was hiding. I drove through the neighborhood, eyes scanning every street, every corner. I tried not to think about the warning the man had given me on the phone. You don't want to get involved. But I couldn't stop myself. The girl needed. I turned onto a side street, one that ran behind the diner where the houses were more spaced out. As I drove slowly, I spotted something familiar, a group of kids playing in front of a rundown house, kicking a ball around. My eyes lingered on them for a moment, then moved to the house itself. It was small, worn down, and the paint was peeling, but something about it made my heart race. I stopped the car and parked across the street. I got out and walked up to the house, trying to appear casual, like I wasn't on some kind of mission. When I knocked on the door, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. It wasn't the girl who answered. It was a woman, mid-30s, dressed in a faded robe. Her hair was unkempt, and her eyes were weary as if she hadn't slept in days. She looked at me like she didn't quite recognize me at first, and I couldn't blame her. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice rough, almost defensive. "I'm looking for a girl," I said. I hesitated, then added, "A young black girl. She was around here a few days ago." The woman's eyes narrowed. She seemed to hesitate before answering, almost as if she was trying to figure out what to say. "What's this about?" I paused, thinking about how much to say. "I saw her at my diner. She's in trouble, I think. I think she's running from someone. I want to help her." The woman looked around, almost nervously, as if she was checking for someone. After a long pause, she stepped aside and motioned for me to come in. I followed her into the dimly lit living room, where old furniture and piles of clutter filled the space. She closed the door behind us, locking it softly. "Her name's Maya," the woman said quietly. "She's my niece. She's been running for a while. The people after her, they won't stop. I tried to protect her, but it's too dangerous." I took a step forward, my heart racing. What happened to her? Who's after her? The woman's hands trembled as she sat down on the couch. Her eyes were filled with sorrow, and there was a sadness to her expression that seemed to speak volumes about the weight she had been carrying for too long. "Her parents, they were caught up in something bad," she began, her voice shaking. Something I couldn't stop. "And when they died, Maya didn't just lose her family. She lost her safety, her whole world. The people who killed them, they came for her neck.
Hey there. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit subscribe to join me for more powerful real-life stories that spark change and inspire strength. Together, we can explore stories of resilience, justice, and the moments that make a difference. Your support helps amplify voices that need to be heard, so let's grow this community of changemakers. Click subscribe now, and let's continue this journey together.
I know about. They weren't good people, but they were good parents. Maya didn't deserve this. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. So the people after her, they're after what she knows? She nodded grimly. Yes. And they've been following her for months. They'll do anything to get to her. They don't care who they hurt in the process. They think if they find her, they can use her to cover up the past. But Maya, she's too smart for them. She's been running, hiding, trying to protect herself. I didn't know what to say. This was more than I could have imagined. I had just thought she was a scared little girl looking for someone to help her. But now it seemed like I was tangled in something far bigger, something dangerous that had been going on long before I even met her. I told her to stay away from people like you, the woman continued, her voice breaking. I told her that if she trusted anyone, it might get them killed. But she's always been kind. She always wants to help others, and that's why she came to you. The words hit me hard. Maya hadn't just come to me for food or safety. She had come to me because she trusted me. And now that trust had pulled me into a world of danger, a world where I didn't know who to trust or what to believe. Where is she now? I asked, almost afraid of the answer. The woman sighed, rubbing her temples. She left this morning. I tried to stop her, but she knows they're closing in. She's trying to keep moving. She knows if they catch her, it'll be over. I don't know where she went, but I know she's trying to find somewhere safe. My heart sank as the weight of the situation settled on me. Maya was out there, alone, running from people who wouldn't hesitate to kill her, and I was supposed to protect her? I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her face it alone. Not after everything she'd been through. I'm going to find her, I said, more to myself than to the woman. I'll find her. I won't let them get her. The woman looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. Please be careful. If they find out you're looking for her, they won't stop at anything to make sure you don't succeed. But I didn't care. I had made a promise to that girl, and I wasn't backing down. I left the woman's house and headed back to my car, my mind racing with thoughts of Maya. She was out there, alone, and if I didn't find her soon, it might be too late. I didn't know how much time I had left, but I was going to do everything in my power to find her. Because in the end, Maya wasn't just any child. She was someone who deserved a future, deserved a chance to live in peace. And I would make sure she got that chance, even if it meant risking everything. I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Every second felt like it could be the one where I lost her, where I lost everything. The woman's warning echoed in my mind. If they find out you're looking for her, they won't stop at anything to make sure you don't succeed. I couldn't let fear control me, but the reality of what I was up against hit me like a cold slap. I drove through the neighborhood again, retracing the same streets I'd already passed a dozen times. I tried to think like Maya. Where would she go? Where could she hide? It didn't seem like she had many options. She couldn't stay in the same place for long, not with people hunting her down. As I drove, I spotted a small alley on the far end of the neighborhood. It was the kind of place you wouldn't look twice at unless you were searching for something. I pulled over, stepping out of the car and scanning the area. The alley was quiet, too quiet, and I felt the weight of that silence pressing on my chest. I walked down the alley slowly, trying to listen for anything that could tell me where Maya had gone. And then I saw it, a small, half-hidden door at the back of an abandoned building. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, covered in overgrown vines and dirt, but something about it called to me. It felt like it could be the place. I hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open. The old hinges creaked loudly, and I winced at the sound, hoping it wouldn't draw attention. I stepped inside, the darkness almost immediate. The air was thick with dust and the scent of mildew. I couldn't see much, but I felt around for the light switch. A flick of the switch revealed a narrow hallway leading deeper into the building. I moved cautiously, trying to make as little noise as possible. The walls were covered in old posters, peeling and faded, a long-forgotten reminder of something that had once been alive. I kept walking, my senses heightened, every step feeling like it could be my last. And then I heard it. A faint sound like a shuffle, something moving just ahead. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze. It was her, I was sure of it. I crept forward, holding my breath as I approached the source of the noise. I rounded a corner and saw her. Maya. She was sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, her knees pulled up to her chest. She looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile somehow. But her eyesure eyes were the same, filled with fear, but also with an undeniable strength. The same strength I had seen in her the day she walked into my dining. The same strength that had made her run, made her fight for survival when everything else seemed to be falling apart. Maya? I said softly, kneeling down in front of her. Her eyes flickered toward me, and for a moment I saw a flash of recognition. But then the fear crept back into her expression, and she shrank back, hugging her knees tight. "They're going to find me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They always do." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the situation settle over me like a thick fog. They always do. Maya wasn't just running from danger. She was running from something relentless, something that wouldn't stop until it had what it wanted. "I'm here to help you," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. "I won't let them hurt you, Maya, I promise." She didn't answer at first. Her eyes searched mine, like she was trying to decide if she could trust me or if it was even safe to. "I've been trying to keep moving," she said, her voice breaking. "But I can't run forever. They'll never stop looking. And they'll hurt anyone who gets in the way." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't just a child scared of the dark. This was a child who had been running from something too big, too dangerous to understand. And now I was involved in it too. "Who are they?" I asked, trying to get some clarity. Maya looked down at the floor, her shoulders shaking as she fought to hold herself together. "I don't know all of it," she said softly. "But they've been looking for me since my parents died. They were. They were part of something, a group that did bad things. I didn't know until it was too late. And now they think I know secrets about them. And they'll do anything to get." The pieces were starting to come together. Maya's parents hadn't just been ordinary people. They had been involved in something far more dangerous, something that had made their daughter a target. And now, Maya was carrying the weight of those secrets on her tiny shoulder. I stood up slowly, taking in the situation. This wasn't just about protecting her from a few bad people. This was bigger, far bigger than I could have imagined. Whoever these people were, they had power, they had resources, and they had no mercy. "Maya," I said gently, "you're not alone. I'll find a way to keep you safe. We'll get you out of here." She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't want anyone else to get hurt. I don't want you to get hurt." I knelt in front of her again, my heart aching. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm not letting them take you." The silence stretched between us, but there was something different now. She wasn't as scared, not completely. She was still afraid, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eye shope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of it. I knew what I had to do. I had to protect her, keep her safe, no matter what. The people after her might have power, but they wouldn't get her. Not if I had anything to say about it. "We need to leave here," I said, helping her to her feet. "We'll go somewhere safe. Somewhere they won't find us." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Where will we go?" "I don't know yet," I replied, pulling her close, trying to offer comfort despite the fear threatening to overtake me. "But we'll figure it out. Together." As we left the building, I glanced over my shoulder one last time, knowing that the moment we stepped out into the open, we'd be running again. But this time, I wasn't going to let her face it alone. Whatever came next, we would face it together. And I wasn't going to let anyone hurt her, not as long as I was still breathing. As we walked away from the abandoned building, the weight of the situation pressed down harder than ever. Every step felt like a countdown, like we were running out of time. Maya was silent beside me, her small hand clutching mine like she was afraid I'd vanish if she let go. I could feel her fear, her uncertainty about the path ahead, but I also felt her trust, fragile but real. We moved quickly, sticking to the shadows, not daring to make any noise. I could already hear the faint sound of footsteps behind us, distant but growing closer. Were they already looking for us? Or was it just my mind playing tricks, amplifying every sound in the quiet night? I didn't stop to check. I couldn't afford to. Not yet. Not while Maya was with me. We made our way down the street, ducking into alleyways and side streets, trying to stay off the main roads where anyone might spot us. The city felt different now, like it was holding its breath, like something was waiting to explode. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see dark figures emerging from the shadows. It was just a gut feeling, but I couldn't ignore it. Maya was right. They wouldn't stop looking for her. They wouldn't stop looking for us. We need to find a place to lay low, I muttered to myself, more to reassure myself than anything. Somewhere safe. Maya stayed close, her footsteps light against the pavement. She didn't speak, but I could tell she was listening to every word I said. I couldn't show her fear. I couldn't let her see how close we were to the edge. As we turned a corner, I spotted a small, dimly lit convenience store up ahead. It wasn't much, but it was open, and maybe I could find a phone or some way to contact someone who could help. I didn't trust anyone, not the way I should, but I needed a plan. Maya, I said softly, stay here for a minute. I'm just going to get something inside. She nodded, though I could see the hesitation in her eyes. She didn't want to be left alone, not even for a second. I squeezed her hand, giving her a small smile I didn't quite feel. Just for a minute. I'll be right back, I promised. I stepped into the store quickly, my eyes scanning the shelves as I moved toward the counter. The store was empty except for the clerk, a tired-looking man in his mid-40s who barely looked up when I entered. I could tell he wasn't paying much attention to what was going on around him, too caught up in his own world. I approached the counter, pretending to browse for a few seconds, then turned toward him. Hey, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. Do you have a phone I could use? I need to make a call. He didn't respond immediately, just blinked at me like I had interrupted some inner monologue. Finally, he sighed and reached under the counter for a battered old phone. It's a payphone out back, he muttered. Don't expect anyone to answer at this hour. I took the phone from him and stepped outside, back toward the alley where Maya was waiting. The store clerk's words rang in my head. Don't expect anyone to answer. I wasn't sure if he meant something more, but I wasn't going to waste time thinking about it. When I stepped back into the alley, Maya was standing near the corner, peering down the street as if she was watching for someone. Her body stiffened as she saw me approach. Is it safe? She asked, her voice full of uncertainty. I nodded, giving her what I hoped was a reassuring smile. For now, let's go around back. I'm just going to make a quick call. We moved toward the back of the store, the alley darker here, the air thick with the smell of garbage and dampness. The phone booth was tucked away in the corner, the light above flickering like it hadn't been maintained in years. I dialed the number I'd been given earlier, the one from the business card the man had slipped to me. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for the dial tone to give way to an answer. Please, please pick up, I thought, my hands shaking. Finally, the line clicked, and a voice on the other end answered. This is Agent Miller. Who's this? I took a sharp breath. My name is... I hesitated. Should I trust him? My name's James. I need help. A little girl, Maya, she's in danger. The people after her there. I know who you're talking about, Agent Miller interrupted, his voice calm. But I could hear the tension in his words. Listen carefully. Do not trust anyone, not even me. You need to get out of the city, and you need to do it fast. My stomach dropped. What are you talking about? Who are you? What's going on? You don't have time for explanations, he said sharply. There are forces at play here that you don't understand. The people after Maya are not just criminals. They're connected to something much bigger, and they won't stop until they've either caught her or made sure she's silenced. You can't trust anyone, not even the police. My heart raced. What had I gotten myself into? Where do we go? I asked, my voice tight with fear. I can't do this alone. I promised her I would protect her. You can't protect her here. You need to get to a safe house. It's the only way she has a chance. I'll send someone to guide you, but you have to go now. I didn't even have time to ask questions. He ended the call before I could get another word out. I turned to Maya, her eyes filled with confusion. Maya, I said, trying to steady my breath. We're leaving, right now. I don't know what's going on, but we have to trust that someone will help us. Her eyes, wide with fear, searched mine. But, where will we go? Somewhere safe, I promised, though I wasn't sure what that meant anymore. I'll protect you. We'll figure this out, together. We didn't have much time. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the alley, and I knew that the people who were after Maya were getting closer. They wouldn't stop, but I wouldn't either. Not as long as she was with me. I pulled Maya close, and together we stepped into the unknown. The road ahead was full of dangers, full of uncertainty, but it was the only choice we had left, and I wasn't going to let anything happen to her, not while I still had breath in my lungs. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly as we moved through the dark streets, staying in the shadows and avoiding the main roads. Every sound made my heart race. Every footstep seemed to echo louder than the last. Maya kept close to me, her small hand still holding mine with a grip that, despite her fear, felt like a lifeline for both of us. We reached the edge of the neighborhood and ducked into another alley. I had no idea where this safe house was, or how we were supposed to get there. But Agent Miller's words kept repeating in my mind. You have to get out of the city. You have to leave now. I didn't question. I didn't have time to question it. If I stayed in the city, I risked exposing us both to whoever was hunting Maya. Whoever they were more than just dangerous, they were organized, methodical. And I had no idea how far they would go to find her. I don't know where to go, I muttered to myself, frustration building inside me. I had promised to protect her, but the situation was slipping further out of my control with every passing minute. Maya, who had been silent for the most part, looked up at me, her eyes still full of that same fear, but also something else, something I hadn't seen in her before, determination. Maybe we can find it, she said quietly. I know where they keep things. I turned to her, confused. What do you mean? Where what is? The safe house, she said, a faint glimmer of something like hope in her voice. I know where it is. My parents used to talk about it when I was younger, before everything went bad. It's not far from here. But we have to hurry. I didn't hesitate. Lead the way. She nodded, her expression hardening with a sense of purpose that made me believe her. Maybe she didn't know everything, but I had to trust her now. We were both in this together. We moved quickly, Maya guiding me through a labyrinth of back streets and alleys. She was small and light on her feet, ducking in and out of shadows like she had been doing it her whole life. I kept my eyes on her, making sure she was safe, but also scanning the streets for any sign of movement, any sign that we weren't alone. The closer we got to wherever we were headed, the more I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Eventually, we reached a part of town I didn't recognize, a rundown area near the edge of the city. The buildings here were older, neglected, their windows boarded up and streets littered with trash. We stopped in front of a large, crumbling brick building, one that looked abandoned at first glance. This is it, Maya said, her voice quiet but firm. This is where they used to hide us when things got too dangerous. I looked up at the building. It was dark, uninviting, but it was the only option we had left. Are you sure? I asked, my voice low. She nodded. It's the only place I can think of. I took a deep breath and walked toward the door, my hand hovering near the handle. As I reached for it, a noise behind us caught my attention. It was faint at first, but it quickly grew louder footsteps, fast and heavy, approaching quickly. I spun around, pulling Maya closer to me as I tried to make sense of what I was hearing. No, not now. My heart pounded and a cold sweat broke out on my skin. I could hear voices now, two angry, harsh voices that didn't belong to the people I had seen earlier in the diner. These were new voices. They were closing in on us. We need to get inside, I said urgently, my voice sharp with panic. Maya was already moving, her hands shaking as she grabbed the door and pulled it open. We slipped inside just as the first of the men rounded the corner, I slammed the door shut behind us, my heart racing as I fumbled to lock. The building was pitch black, and the only sound was the frantic beat of my pulse. I turned to Maya, breathing hard. "Where do we go now?" "Upstairs," she whispered, her face pale. "It's safe there. Just follow me." I didn't question her. I followed her as she led the way, her footsteps light and quick. We moved through the darkness, the musty air filling my lungs as we made our way up a narrow, creaky staircase. The building seemed to groan under our weight, as if it were just as desperate to stay hidden as we were. We reached the top floor, and Maya stopped in front of a door at the end of the hallway. She hesitated for a moment, then pushed it open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. The room was bare except for a few old mattresses and a couple of chairs, but it was safe, for now. I closed the door behind us and locked it, then leaned against it, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Maya walked to the far corner of the room and sat down on one of the mattresses, wrapping her arms around her knees. I stood there, unsure of what to say. My mind was a mess, my thoughts scattered. How had we gotten here? How had things spiraled so quickly? But it didn't matter now. The only thing that mattered was Maya, and keeping her safe. She looked up at me, her eyes still full of that fear, but now there was something else in them. Something that wasn't there before. "I'm scared," she said quietly. I knelt down beside her, taking her hand gently in mine. "I know. But you're not alone, Maya. You don't have to be scared anymore. I'm here. I'll protect you." She nodded, though I could tell the fear wasn't gone. It wouldn't be gone until we were safe, and even then I knew the scars of everything she had been through would linger. I sat beside her, both of us silent for a while, the weight of what was happening pressing down on us. We didn't know how long we would stay here or how long we would be safe, but for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a sense of calm, a sense that, at least for this moment, we were okay. But I knew it wouldn't last. The people who were after Maya wouldn't stop. They never did. And no matter where we went, no matter how many doors we closed behind us, they would find us eventually. But I wasn't going to let that happen, not if I could stop it. We had a chance now, and I wasn't going to waste it. I looked over at Maya, offering her a quiet smile. "We'll figure this out, I promise." And though I wasn't sure how, deep down, I knew that we would. Together. The room was still, the kind of silence that clung to you like a heavy blanket. It wasn't peaceful, far from it. It was the silence of waiting, of uncertainty. Maya sat cross-legged on the mattress, her hands gripping her knees tightly, her eyes darting to the window as though expecting someone to appear at any moment. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. I wanted to tell her everything would be okay, that we were safe, that the worst was behind us, but I couldn't lie to her. I didn't know if everything would be okay. The truth was, I had no idea what we were up against. But I did know one thing. I wasn't going to let anyone hurt her, not if I could help it. I leaned back against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't want to let her see how shaken I was. I had to be strong for her, even if I didn't feel strong. Even if I felt like I was drowning in the fear and confusion of it all. "Maya," I said after a long moment, my voice quiet but firm. "You don't have to be alone in this. I promised I'd protect you, and I will, but I need you to trust me." She didn't answer right away, but she looked at me, her dark eyes searching my face. There was a flicker of something, hope, maybe? It was faint, but it was there. She nodded slowly, though her grip on her knees didn't loosen. "I trust you," she whispered, "but I don't know how long we can hide." I didn't have an answer for that. I didn't know how long we could hide either, but I had to keep moving, had to find a way to keep her safe. I couldn't let her down. We sat there for hours, the darkness outside creeping into the room. I heard nothing but the occasional creak of the building and the sound of our breathing. Every now and then, Maya would glance at me, her eyes full of questions she didn't ask. It was as if she was waiting for me to come up with a plan, to tell her what came next. But I didn't have one. Not yet. I had been so focused on getting her out of the diner, getting her to this place, that I hadn't stopped to think about the next step. What would we do when the people after her found us here? Where would we go? Who could we trust? I stood up suddenly, pacing the small room. We need to think this through. We need to figure out where we go from here. Maya looked at me, her expression unreadable. She wasn't crying anymore, but I could see the exhaustion in her face. She was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being afraid. "There's nowhere left to run," she said, her voice small but matter-of-fact. "They'll find us wherever we go. They always do." Her words stung, but they were the truth. We could keep running, but I knew that eventually we'd run out of places to hide. Maya had been on the run for so long, and now I had joined her in that desperate race to stay one step ahead. I clenched my fists, frustration boiling inside me. "I won't let them get you," I said, the words more for myself than for her. "I'll find a way to stop them, I promise." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time since we'd arrived here, I saw something like relief in her eyes. Maybe she didn't believe me entirely. Maybe she didn't think there was a way out either. But for a moment, there was a crack in the wall of fear she had built around herself. "You don't have to do this alone," I added softly. "We're in this together." Maya swallowed hard, then nodded, her lips trembling slightly. "Together." I sat back down beside her, feeling the weight of the promise hanging between us. There was no going back now. I had made my choice. I had chosen to protect her, to help her survive whatever was coming. We spent the rest of the night in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The sounds of the city outside seemed distant now, muffled by the walls of the old building. I kept watch through the small crack in the window, scanning the dark street below, my mind constantly on alert. But nothing happened. No one came. The night passed uneventfully, but I knew that wouldn't last. The calm before the storm, I thought. By morning, I had made up my mind. I couldn't stay in this abandoned building forever. We couldn't just hide out and hope the people chasing us would eventually give up. That wasn't how this worked. The longer we stayed here, the more likely it was that they would find us. I had to take action. I turned to Maya, who had fallen asleep curled up on the mattress, her head resting against the wall. For a moment, I just watched her, feeling an overwhelming sense of protectiveness wash over me. This little girl, this brave, scared, strong little girl had been through more than anyone her age should ever have to endure. And now, it was my turn to help her. I quietly stood up, gathering my things, ready to move. It was time to leave, time to find a real plan. "Maya," I whispered, gently shaking her awake. She stirred but didn't immediately open her eyes. "Maya, we have to go. It's not safe here anymore." She opened her eyes slowly, blinking in the dim light. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at me, and then nodded. Without a word, she stood up and began to gather her things. We were ready. I didn't know what was waiting for us outside. I didn't know where we would go or what we would do next. But I knew one thing for sure. We weren't going to give up. Not now, not ever. I took a deep breath, my hand on the door handle. "Let's go," I said, my voice firm. Maya's hand slipped into mine, and together we stepped back into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next. Together, we stepped out of the dim room and into the cold morning air, the city streets still quiet, like the calm before a storm. My heart was pounding as I led Maya down the narrow hallway of the building and out the door into the alley. The shadows stretched long in the early light, and the world around us seemed empty, like it was holding its breath. I kept my pace steady, trying to stay calm, but inside, I was a bundle of nerves. I didn't know what we were running from now, whether it was the people hunting us or the fear of getting caught. The city felt different now, like it had turned against us, as though every corner and every face was a potential threat. Maya walked beside me, her steps light but hesitant, like she was still uncertain whether this was the right thing to do. I couldn't blame her. There was so much unknown in our future now. We didn't have a clear plan, no clear place to go. But I knew we couldn't stay hidden in that building forever. It was only a matter of time before they found us there. We moved quickly through the alleys, keeping to the shadows, trying to be as invisible as possible. I was constantly scanning the area, my eyes darting from street to street, every sound putting me on edge. The last thing I wanted was to get cornered by the people after Maya. I kept my hand close to hers, making sure she was with me, making sure she felt safe, even if I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep that promise. We reached the end of the alley and paused at the street corner. I looked both ways, trying to gauge if anyone was following us. There was a low hum of traffic in the distance, but the street we were on was quiet, too quiet. "You okay?" I whispered to Maya, who was standing a little too still beside me. She nodded, but her face was pale, her eyes tired, like she hadn't slept in days. "I'm okay," she said, though her voice was tight. She was trying to be brave, trying to keep it together. I could see it in her eyes, the weight of everything she had been through. I couldn't let her carry that weight alone. "We'll find somewhere safe," I promised her again, though I wasn't sure where that was. "We'll figure this out." She didn't respond, but I saw the faintest glimmer of hope in her eyes. She was still holding on to the idea that maybe, just maybe, we could make it out of this. And that was enough for me to keep pushing forward. We continued walking, making our way through the city, ducking into shops and other buildings when necessary. Every now and then I'd catch someone watching us, a strange look in their eyes, but I'd keep my head down and my pace quick. I didn't know who could be trusted, so I trusted no one. Hours passed. We walked for what felt like an eternity, but no one came after us. It was like the city itself had given up on us, or maybe we were just too careful. We hadn't even stopped for food or water, just kept moving, the adrenaline keeping us both going. But the farther we got from that building, the more I realized we were running out of time. Finally, we reached a small park on the outskirts of the city. It was tucked between two run-down apartment buildings, a quiet space where we could catch our breath, at least for a little while. There was a bench near a row of trees, the kind of place where people sat to escape the noise of the city. I took a seat on the bench, my legs sore from the long walk. Maya sat beside me, her small frame looking even more fragile now. I didn't say anything for a while. We both needed the silence. "You're tired," I finally said, glancing at her. She didn't respond immediately. She just stared at the ground, her shoulders slumped. "I'm always tired," she whispered. "It feels like I've been running forever." Her words broke something inside me. I knew she was right. She had been running for so long, hiding from people who would never stop coming after her, and I had only just joined her in this fight. But I had to be strong for her. I had to keep going. "We're going to figure this out," I said again, though I wasn't sure how. "We'll find a way to stop." Maya looked up at me, her eyes wide. "Do you think we can?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to give her that certainty, to make her believe that everything was going to be okay. But the truth was, I didn't know. I didn't know how to fight people who had been chasing her for so long. People who were connected to something bigger than we could understand. But what I did know was that I couldn't give up. Not on her. "I'll do everything I can," I said softly. "You don't have to be scared anymore. I'm with you, and I won't let them hurt you." For the first time in what felt like forever, Maya allowed herself to lean against me, resting her head on my shoulder. I wrapped my arm around her, holding her close. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was the only thing I could give. We sat there for a long time, not talking, just listening to the sounds of the city around us. The day was fading, the sun dipping lower in the sky, but I didn't want to move. I didn't want to think about what came next. For just a moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe we could find peace, even if it was only for a little while. But deep down, I knew the truth. Peace was a luxury we couldn't afford. I stood up after a while, offering Maya my hand. She took it without hesitation, and together, we walked away from the park, back into the uncertainty of what lay ahead. And though I didn't know where we were going, or what would happen next, one thing was clear: I wasn't going to stop. Not until Maya was safe. Not until the people who had been hunting her were gone for good. We were in this together, and we weren't backing down. We walked in silence for a while, the weight of our situation pressing on me, but I refused to let it show. Every step I took, I thought of Maya. I had to stay strong for her. She had lost so much already, and I wasn't about to let her lose more. I kept my eyes moving, constantly scanning the area. I wasn't sure how long we could stay in the city, or how long we could keep running without being found. But every second that passed, every step that took us farther from the park, I couldn't help but feel like we were running out of time. We kept walking, moving toward the outskirts of the city where things were quieter, less populated. I didn't know where we were going. I didn't know if there was anywhere left that could offer us the safety we so desperately needed. As we walked, I started thinking about what Agent Miller had told Meth, the warning he had given me. You can't trust anyone. That statement echoed in my mind. I knew I couldn't go to the police. If the people after Maya had connections like I suspected, the police might be compromised too. I was starting to feel the weight of this whole mess, the isolation, the fear, the knowledge that no matter how much I wanted to believe in people, I had no idea who I could trust. And then, just as I was starting to feel the walls close in on me, Maya stopped. She tugged at my sleeve and I looked down at her, confused. Do you hear that? She whispered. I stopped immediately, listening carefully. In the distance, I heard the unmistakable sound of a car engine, the low rumble of something large moving in our direction. My heart leapt into my throat. We ducked into an alley without thinking, pressing ourselves against the cold brick walls. I held my breath, straining to hear. The car's engine grew louder, closer. I peeked around the corner just enough to see a black SUV coming down the road, slowly, almost deliberately. It passed the alley, and for a moment I thought we might be safe, but then it stopped. The SUV turned around, backing up toward the entrance of the alley. I turned back to Maya, my heart pounding in my chest. Stay quiet, I whispered. Stay hidden. Maya nodded, her wide eyes filled with fear, but she didn't make a sound. We crouched low, staying out of sight as best we could. The SUV stopped right at the mouth of the alley. My breath caught in my throat as I heard the doors open. Two men got out, both dressed in dark clothes, their movements quick and purposeful. They didn't even look around, just walked toward the alley as though they knew exactly where we were. My mind raced. This is it. They found us. I grabbed Maya's hand and pulled her farther into the alley, away from the men. We couldn't outrun them. We couldn't fight them. All we could do was hide. We crouched behind a dumpster, trying to make ourselves as small as possible. The men's footsteps echoed in the narrow space, getting closer with each passing second. I could feel Maya trembling beside me, but she didn't say a word. She didn't move. It was like she was holding her breath, waiting for something, anything that would give us a chance to get away. I strained my ears, trying to hear the men's conversation, but their words were too muffled, too distant. All I could hear were the sounds of their shoes scraping against the ground as they searched the alley. I looked at Maya, her face pale and set in a way I hadn't seen before. She was holding it together, but I knew she was just as terrified as I was. They can't find us. Not like this. Not now. I had to think. I had to act. Listen, I whispered to Maya, my voice barely audible. I need you to stay here. Don't move, don't make a sound. I'm going to distract. When I say go, you run. Okay. Maya looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and trust. She didn't speak, but she nodded, her grip on my hand tightening. I took a deep breath, heart hammering in my chest. I had no plan, no clear idea of how I was going to get us out of this, but I couldn't let them catch us. Not. Slowly, I pulled away from the dumpster, moving as quietly as I could. I glanced back at Maya one last time. She was still hidden, still waiting for the signal. I could see the fear in her eyes, but there was something else. Something that told me she had already accepted how dangerous this was. The two men were still searching the alley, walking slowly, methodically, as if they knew we were somewhere close. I waited for the right moment, holding my breath, praying they wouldn't spot me. Finally, one of them turned his back, moving toward the far end of the alley. The other was still closer to the dumpster. Now or never. I darted out from behind the dumpster, running as fast as I could. The man heard me and turned, but by then, I was already halfway down the alley. Hey, the man shouted. Stop! I didn't look back. I just ran, pumping my legs as fast as I could. I could hear footsteps behind Mephist, heavy coming closer, but I didn't dare slow down. I can't stop. I glanced over my shoulder for just a second, enough to see the man gaining on me. He was almost there. I could feel the panic building in my chest. My body was screaming at me to stop, to give up, but I couldn't. Not with Maya behind me. I couldn't let her down now. I turned a corner, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and there, just a few yards ahead, was a small alley that led to a wider street. I darted down it, hoping, praying that I could lose them. The man cursed behind me, but I kept pushing forward. Then a soft voice caught my attention. Jane, Maya. She had followed me, coming up behind, but I didn't have time to stop and turn. I kept running. Then, suddenly, I saw a tan open door, leading into a small building. Without thinking, I shoved it open and dragged Maya inside, slamming the door behind us. We were inside. I slid down the door, panting, my chest heaving. Maya was next to me, her face pale and wide-eyed. They're right behind us, I muttered. But for a moment we were safe. For a moment we were hidden. I leaned against the door, my heart hammering in my chest as I listened, straining to hear the footsteps that were still echoing in the alley outside. I held my breath, willing the world to stay silent for just a little longer. The building around us was old, abandoned, and smelled of mildew and decay, but for the moment it was the only place we had. Maya stood beside me, her hand still gripping mine, her face a mix of fear and disbelief. She was trying to catch her breath, her small chest rising and falling rapidly, but her eyes kept darting toward the door, like she was expecting it to burst open at any second. We're not safe here, I whispered, though I knew she already knew that. The men were close. They had to be. I took a step away from the door, my mind racing for the next move. We couldn't just stand here and wait for them to find us. We had to get out. We had to move fast. Where do we go? Maya asked, her voice shaking. What if they catch us again? I turned to face her, trying to force a calm I didn't feel into my voice. We don't let them catch us. We keep moving. She nodded, her eyes filled with both fear and determination. Despite everything, I could see it in her, the same strength that had kept her going all this time. She was scared, yes, but she wasn't ready to give up. Neither was I. I turned to look around the room. It was a small, abandoned storefront, a relic from a past life. The walls were cracked, and the window was boarded up, blocking any view from the outside. There was no way out the front, and no easy escape route I could see. I needed a plan. And fast. Then my eyes caught something near the back of the room, a small door that led into what appeared to be a basement. It was barely noticeable, tucked behind a pile of discarded furniture. My heart skipped a beat. That way, I said, grabbing Maya's hand again and pulling her toward the door. She followed without question, though I could see the hesitation in her eyes. We didn't know what was on the other side, but we didn't have a choice. The men outside were closing in, and this was the only option we had left. I pushed open the door to the basement, the hinges creaking loudly, but no one seemed to hear. The stairs leading down were steep and narrow, and the air was damp and cold. We descended quickly, the faint sounds of the men outside growing muffled as we got farther away. The basement was dark, the only light coming from a small window high up on the wall. The place was filled with old boxes, furniture, and other forgotten items. I held Maya's hand tightly as we moved further into the shadows, trying to stay as quiet as possible. I could hear the men outside, their voices drifting down from the street. They were close, too close. We have to hide, I whispered, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. Stay down here and stay quiet. Don't move unless I say so. Maya nodded, her face pale but determined. I could see how hard this was for her, how much she had already endured. And now, once again, she was hiding, waiting for the storm to pass. She didn't deserve any of this, but there was no way to explain that to her. She just had to survive. We both did. I paced around the basement, looking for any place we could hide, but it was empty, filled with nothing but old junk. There was nowhere to hide that felt safe. The voices grew louder. They were getting close. I turned back to Maya.
Stay here.
I said softly, as I made my way toward the farthest corner of the basement. There, tucked behind a large, rusted filing cabinet, I found a small hatch. It was barely noticeable, covered in dust and cobwebs, but when I pulled on it, it opened with a loud creak. I froze, listening for the footsteps. They hadn't heard it. I motioned for Maya to come over, my heart pounding in my chest. "We're going down there," I said. "It's our only chance." Maya didn't argue. She stepped toward me, her eyes wide, her body tense, but she trusted me. She had no choice. We both knew it. I climbed into the narrow tunnel first, the dampness of the space making the air thick and heavy. The walls were lined with old pipes and wires, the low hum of electricity buzzing in the distance. The tunnel was cramped, barely wide enough for us to squeeze through. Maya followed close behind, her footsteps light, her breath shallow. We moved quickly, trying to stay as quiet as possible, but I couldn't help but feel the weight of every step, the fear that at any moment we could be discovered. The tunnel wound its way beneath the city, twisting and turning, leading us deeper into the unknown. I had no idea where it went or where we would end up, but I didn't care. Right now, it was the only chance we had. We kept moving, one step at a time, our hearts racing in unison. The sound of our footsteps was drowned by the low hum of the pipes, the distant noise of the city above us, and the ever-present fear that the men were still out there looking for us. I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop running, not until Maya was safe, not until we were free of this nightmare. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Time seemed to lose meaning in the darkness of the tunnel. We didn't talk, didn't make a sound, just moved forward, one step at a time. I tried to focus on the path ahead, but every thought in my head kept circling back to the same thing. Are they still looking for us? Eventually, the tunnel opened up into a larger space, an underground storage area. It wasn't much, but it was another place to hide. I motioned for Maya to follow me, and we crouched behind a stack of old crates, the only shelter in sight. I sat down, trying to catch my breath. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this exhausted physically, mentally, emotionally. But there was no time to rest. I looked at Maya, her eyes wide, her body still trembling. "Are we safe here?" she asked quietly, her voice small, the words heavy with the weight of everything she had been through. I looked around the underground space, listening for any sounds that might suggest we weren't alone. I didn't hear anything, but that didn't mean we were safe. "I don't know," I said softly, my voice grim. "But we're alive. And we'll keep fighting, Maya. We'll keep running until we can't anymore." She nodded, her small face determined, but still so full of fear. I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close. We didn't know what came next, but for now we had each other. And that was all we needed. We sat in the dim light of the underground space, the silence around us almost suffocating. The walls of the storage area felt like they were closing in, but I kept my focus on the one thing that mattered: keeping Maya safe. Every second that passed without someone finding us felt like a small victory, but I couldn't let my guard down. Not yet. Maya was still trembling, her head resting against my shoulder as she tried to catch her breath. I could feel her body shake with each inhale, her fear palpable even in the silence. I rubbed her back gently, trying to comfort her, but I could tell she was still haunted by everything she'd been through. I couldn't imagine the kind of trauma she had faced, the weight of what it meant to be hunted, to never know when or where the next danger would strike. "We'll be okay," I said softly, though I wasn't sure who I was reassuring more, her or myself. "We'll figure it out. I won't let them get." Maya nodded, but her eyes were distant, like she was lost in her own world. I could see it. She was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of always being afraid. I knew how she felt. But I wasn't going to give up. I couldn't. Not when I had made a promise to protect. "We can't stay here long," I murmured. "I don't know if this place is safe. We need to keep moving." Maya didn't respond. She just curled up against me, pulling her knees to her chest. I didn't push her to talk. She'd been through so much already. We both had. But the weight of it all hung heavy between us. And for a moment, I just sat there, letting the quiet settle in. The quiet didn't last. I was suddenly jolted from my thoughts by a sound, faint at first, but growing louder. It was the sound of footsteps, distant but unmistakable. Someone was coming. I froze, my heart beat loud in my ear. I motioned for Maya to stay still and quiet. Her eyes met mine, wide with fear, but she didn't make a sound. She understood. We had to stay hidden. The footsteps grew closer, the sounds of heavy boots echoing through the underground tunnels. My mind raced. There was no way to know if these were the same men who had been chasing us or if it was someone else. Either way, I knew we couldn't risk being caught. I pulled Maya with me as I scrambled to find a place to hide. The storage area was sparse, just piles of old crates and boxes. I spotted a small alcove near the back, behind a stack of crates. It was cramped, but it would have to do. I ushered Maya into the alcove and crouched down beside her, my breath shallow as I strained to hear the footsteps. The air felt thick, too still, as if the whole world was holding its breath along with us. The footsteps stopped right outside. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't hear us, praying we hadn't made any noise that would give us away. For what felt like an eternity, all I could hear was the pounding of my heart in my chest. The footsteps seemed to be just outside, hovering, as if waiting for something. And then, finally, the sound of retreating footsteps. They were leaving. I waited another few seconds, just to be sure. Maya was still pressed against me, her eyes wide with fear but full of trust. She hadn't said a word, but I could feel the tension in her body. She was just as scared as I was, but she was holding it together. I slowly exhaled, the relief washing over me like a tidal wave. The footsteps were gone. We were still safe. For now. I looked at Maya, my voice barely a whisper. "We can't stay here long. We need to keep moving. If they come back." She nodded quickly, her eyes sharp. "We can't stay in one place too long." I stood up, offering my hand to Maya. "Let's go. We're getting out of here." She took my hand without hesitation, her small fingers gripping mine tightly. She was ready, even if she didn't know what the next step would be. She was ready to keep running, to keep fighting. We moved quietly through the storage area, slipping out through a back door that led to a narrow street. The city was still asleep, the morning light just beginning to filter through the fog. We stepped carefully into the street, staying in the shadows, our footsteps muffled by the dampness of the concrete. I kept my head low, scanning the area, but the street was deserted. I had no plan, no clear destination, but I knew we couldn't stay on the move forever. We needed to find a way to get ahead of whoever was after us. We needed help, but where could we go? "Where do we go now?" Maya's voice was small, hesitant. She was asking the same question I had been asking myself for hours. I didn't have an answer, not really. But I knew one thing for sure: we couldn't stop. We couldn't slow down. Not until we were free. "We find somewhere safe," I said, my voice steady, even though doubt gnawed at the edges of my mind. "Somewhere they won't find us, and we'll keep moving until we get there." Maya looked up at me, her eyes full of that quiet strength again. I could see it, the same resolve I had seen in her when she had whispered those 2 words to me in the diner. She wasn't giving up, and neither was I. We kept walking, moving further into the city, knowing the danger wasn't behind us but ahead, waiting. But for now, we had each other, and that had to be enough. As we disappeared into the early morning fog, I made a promise to myself. We would keep running. We would survive, and when the time came, we would find a way to put an end to all of this, together. The city stretched before us, vast and unfamiliar. We didn't know where we were headed, but we had no other choice but to keep going. The streets were empty, quiet in the early morning light, but the silence felt like a ticking clock, a reminder that we weren't safe yet. I glanced down at Maya, walking silently beside me, her eyes filled with quiet determination. I could feel the weight of the journey on her small shoulders, the fear she carried, the burden of the secret she had been running from for so long. But there was something else in her, something stronger: resilience, an unspoken promise to keep fighting, to keep moving forward no matter what. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if we would make it out of this alive. But I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to stop, not while Maya was by my side. We reached the outskirts of the city by midday, the buildings growing sparse, replaced by empty fields and broken-down houses. The quiet was both a relief and a threat. Out here, there was nowhere to hide. We couldn't stay out in the open for long. We had no car, no resources, nothing to rely on except each other and whatever scraps we could find. But that was all we needed. We would make it. After walking for what felt like hours, we spotted a small, rundown farmhouse in the distance. It looked abandoned, with peeling paint and overgrown grass, but it was our only option. "We can stop there for a while," I said to Maya, trying to keep my voice steady, though uncertainty churned in my gut. "We'll rest, figure out what to do next." She didn't say anything, just nodded. She was quiet, but I knew she was thinking. We both were. Our next move was critical. One wrong step and we'd be back where we started, running from the people who wanted to bury the truth. Bury her. We made our way toward the farmhouse, and when we reached the front door, I knocked softly. No response. I knocked again. Finally, the door creaked open just a crack, and a man's face appeared in the gap. He was older, graying hair and tired eyes, worn by years of struggle. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice cautious. I didn't know if we could trust him, but we had no other options. "We're just passing through," I said carefully. "We need a place to rest, just for a few hours." He eyed us for a long moment, sizing us up. I held my breath, waiting for the rejection, for him to tell us to leave. Then he sighed, stepping back from the door. "All right," he said gruffly. "You can stay, but you don't ask questions and you don't bring trouble." I nodded, feeling a small weight lift off my chest. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. We stepped inside, and the man led us to a small back room, sparse but warm. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself relax, if only for a moment. We sat down on the dusty floor, Maya curling up next to me, her head resting on my shoulder. We didn't talk, we didn't need to. But as we sat there in the quiet, something inside me shifted. The fight was far from over. The people who were after Maya hadn't given up yet, and they would. But this wasn't just her fight anymore. It was mine, too. And together, we would face whatever came next. And maybe, just maybe, there was a way to end this once and for all. Later that night, as the farmhouse settled into a quiet dark, the man left us alone. I stayed awake, watching over Maya as she slept, her body finally giving in to exhaustion. The silence of the night was comforting, but the fear still gnawed at me. I knew that the calm wouldn't last forever, but for now we were safe, and that was enough. The next day, I would take Maya to a place where we could get help, where we could fight back, where the people who had destroyed her life would finally face justice. It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot, but as I sat there watching her sleep, I knew one thing for certain. We weren't running anymore. We were ready to fight, and together we would win. The quiet of the farmhouse felt both like a haven and a prison. As I sat there, watching Maya sleep, her small chest rising and falling with the weight of exhaustion, I couldn't help but think about her parents, about the people who had caused all of this. Maya had told me a little about them. Her parents had been involved in something much darker than anyone could have imagined. They had been part of a clandestine group, operating in the shadows, doing things that most people would never know about or want to know. But the truth was, they weren't just criminals. They had been involved in some dangerous, far-reaching operation that linked powerful people together, men and women who would do anything to protect their secret. Maya's parents had been good people, despite their involvement in that world. They'd been trying to get out, trying to protect their daughter from the things they had gotten mixed up in. But when they tried to leave, they were marked for death. Maya's mother and father had been killed in a botched attempt to escape, their deaths covered up as an accident. But Maya had seen too much, heard too much, and the people who had killed her parents knew she knew. They knew she was a threat to everything they had worked to hide. That's why they'd been after her. The truth was, Maya was more than just an innocent child caught in the crossfire. She had information, vital information that could tear apart everything that had been built in the shadows. They wanted to silence her. They wanted to bury her, just like they had buried her parents. I had no idea how deep this went, how many people were involved, but I knew one thing for sure. The danger wasn't over. The people who had killed her parents would keep coming for her. They would stop at nothing to keep their secrets safe. And that's why I couldn't let her go. I couldn't just hide her away in some small corner of the world and hope they would forget. I had to help her get the justice her parents deserved. We couldn't let their deaths be in vain. But there was more at stake now. It wasn't just about survival. It was about bringing down the entire operation that had caused all of this, the people who thought they were untouchable, who thought they could get away with murder. We were going to fight back. We had to. I sat there, deep in thought, when Maya stirred beside me. Her eyes fluttered open and she looked up at me, her small face still marked by the exhaustion and the trauma of everything she had endured. "I'm scared," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with the same fear she had carried with her for so long. I didn't know what to say, not at first, but I took a deep breath and pulled her close, wrapping my arms around her. "I know," I said quietly, "but you're not alone anymore. I won't let them get you, I promise." She clung to me, her small arms wrapping around me like she was trying to hold on to whatever safety she could find. I felt the weight of everything that had happened, the pain, the fear, the loss, and I knew we couldn't keep running. It was time to fight back. It was time to expose the people who had caused all of this. We would go after the truth. We would take down the people who had destroyed her family and who still wanted to silence her. The road ahead would be dangerous, but it was the only road we could take. In the coming days, we would find allies. We would find the people who could help us expose the truth. People who had the power to bring down the operation that had kept Maya and her parents in the shadows for so long. It wouldn't be easy, but together we could do it. The fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Maya's parents had tried to protect her, and they had died trying to escape the people who had used them. Their story wasn't over. Neither was hers. And together, we were going to make sure it ended the right way. The people who had taken everything from her would face justice. The truth would come out, no matter the cost. We would make sure. And that was the beginning of the end for the ones who had hurt us.